Since the summer of 1947, nearly every American president has been impacted in some way by the question of UFOs, or as the government likes to call them now, UAPs. Some have spoke openly on the subject, others have dodged questions, and some are surrounded by rumors that refuse to die. In part 1 of this video, I'll go over presidents from Harry Truman to Gerald Ford, tracing how America's leaders have grappled with one of the greatest mysteries of our time. While some presidents had more interaction in the world of UFOs than others, you'll notice a theme. None have dismissed this topic outright. We'll look at interviews, documents, even stories that may have some credibility. They might be verified, some of them might be more speculative, but all of them are interesting and all of them have potential connections here. But we have to remember, UFOs would be the biggest secret held in human history. Even if there was a legitimate document or story leak, the US government would likely try to hide that in some way, shape, or form. We start our series with a look at Harry Truman, who served as president from 1945 to 1953.
Joint Chiefs of Staff talk to you or concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have anything on the subject, sir?
No, I haven't anything on the subject, and there's always things like that going on.
We have to start by mentioning Truman was president during the famous Roswell crash in 1947. There are earlier UFO stories, such as Kenneth Arnold's sighting in earlier 1947, but obviously this specific event has helped to transform the UFO phenomenon and put it on the map. Many people know this story by now, but to summarize.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection. Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved.
Less than a day later, the official story would change to that being a weather balloon. Since then, hundreds of witnesses have come forward, including the famed Jessie Marcel, the man in the photo that was supposedly holding the quote-unquote weather balloon. The official government story on Roswell has changed multiple times over the last 80 years or so. If something actually happened involving non-human intelligence during this event, Truman would be undoubtedly notified. There didn't seem to be an established protocol at this time for this kind of an event, hence the sloppy press release and then retraction very soon after. Roswell, of course, deserves multiple video deep dive, which I will be conducting in the future to see if we can find anything new and uncovered or any connections to this wild incident. Another major public-facing UFO event occurred in 1952, the Washington, D.C. UFO flap. Truman himself demanded briefings on just what the heck was going on in the skies above the White House. I've already done a deep dive on this video, definitely check it out for more context on the discussion. Of course, there are also seemingly less known UFO crashes or landings during Truman's time. One of the more wild cases include a crash landing at Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. One of the best UFO researchers out there, UAP Gerb, has a fascinating video on this incident. I highly recommend checking it out. The last thing we should bring up in regards to Truman is the highly debated Majestic 12 documents. In December of 1984, an unmarked package arrived on the doorstep of film producer Jamie Chandere. In the package was undeveloped film. Chandere would hurriedly develop the film in his film room. The film would contain what are known as the Majestic 12 documents, or at least some of them. Majestic 12 was an organization supposedly comprised of 12 important people during the time, including military generals, scientists, the first Secretary of Defense James Forrestal, and even the most prominent debunker at the time, Harvard's Professor Donald Menzel. These 12 men were essentially Truman's task force. The documents often read, "For magic eyes only." There are numerous pages out there. Some seem to be hoaxes designed to replicate the real thing, whereas others, it's hard to tell. Some of the topics discussed in these documents include previous crash retrievals, potential alien or non-human intelligent species discovered, to procedures to secure crash sites and create cover stories. The FBI has rather hilariously reviewed these and slapped the word bogus on all of them. If these were real, they probably wouldn't come out and slap the word real on all the documents. Researcher Ryan Wood has gone into great detail on the depths it took to make these documents if they were a hoax, with things like font size, a raised Z, which typewriters had during that time, and things like which terminology was used during the time period. Check these documents out for yourself at majesticdocuments.com. Next, we have to take a look at Dwight Eisenhower, another major figure in UFO lore. Some of the Majestic 12 documents were reportedly organized for a briefing for then President-elect Eisenhower in 1953. However, certainly the most famous claim for Eisenhower tying to UFOs has to be the wild claim that he actually met with non-human intelligent beings at both Holloman and Edwards Air Force bases. The story is difficult to take in, treat as fact just off face value. However, there are numerous oddities to look over surrounding these rumored meetings between Eisenhower and potential non-human intelligent beings. Researcher Timothy Good, a former advisor to the Department of Defense, details this account in his book, Earth, an Alien Enterprise. On February 20th, 1954, Eisenhower was reportedly golfing in Palm Springs. All of a sudden, the president went missing. He was actually briefly reported as dead from a heart attack by the Associated Press. 2 minutes later, the Associated Press retracted that story. Well, if he wasn't dead, where did he go? The press scrambled and threw together a story. The story was, Eisenhower chipped a tooth while eating fried chicken and made an unscheduled dentist trip to Dr. Francis Purell to fix the tooth. Some major issues with this claim. No dental records were ever found showing that Dr. Purcell had treated Eisenhower. Dr. Purcell's wife stated in a 1979 interview that she had no recollection of her husband ever treating Eisenhower. Eisenhower's presidential library, which can be viewed online, shows numerous files and papers from that trip on February 20th. Thank you notes for things like food, services provided. They're all there. The supposed dental trip? Nothing in the presidential library stating that this was real. So we've gone from dead to dentist trip with no records. Where is he? It's said that Eisenhower actually flew to Edwards Air Force Base and met with a species of non-human intelligent beings. Reportedly, people saw Air Force One land at the base that evening, and a saucer was also cleared to land, with the president and 4 others going on board. Those 4 others were writer and lecturer Gerald Light, who wrote this letter that's on screen, Franklin Allen of Hearst Newspapers, Edwin Nurse, who was Truman's financial advisor, and James McIntyre, at that time the Archbishop of Los Angeles. Apparently, a conversation was held between Eisenhower and the beings. Just like other rumored conversations with non-human intelligence, these conversations were conducted telepathically.
And it's quite clear that you're talking about agreements between America and non-human intelligences. Have we made agreements with non-human intelligences?
That's the kind of information I really hope national leadership is able to get to the bottom of.
I need to pin you down on this. Are there agreements between non-human intelligences and the American government?
I think that's a question that I would like to know all the details of as well.
The offer from these beings was supposedly assistance with technology and to help bring on peace. But the cost would have been to disarm our nuclear weapons. Eisenhower reportedly declined the offer, left, and was at church in Los Angeles the next morning. Rumors abound of future meetings that would happen at Holloman Air Force Base over the next couple years. 2 meetings, to be exact. Obviously, right off the bat, it's a lot to take in. It seems bogus, right? Well, coupled with the obvious disappearance of the president at the time, claims from multiple people have supported this. Let's start with Charles L. Suggs. According to him, his father, also Charles Suggs, was a former commander with the U.S. Navy who actually attended the meeting at Edwards Air Force Base with Eisenhower. Next, let's listen to a quote from Henry L. McElroy.
In the New Hampshire State Legislature, I served on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee. It was apparently important that as a representative of the sovereign people who had elected me to this honorable office, that I be updated on a large number of topics related to the affairs of our people and our nation. As I understood it, some of those ongoing topics had been examined and categorized as federal, state, local development, and security matters. These documents related to various topics, some of which spanned decades of our nation's history. One of those recurring topics is the reason I am addressing you this evening. I would like to submit to our nation my personal testimony of one document related to one of these ongoing topics, which I saw while in office serving on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee. The document I saw was an official brief to President Eisenhower. To the best of my memory, this brief was pervaded with a sense of hope, and it informed President Eisenhower of the continued presence of extraterrestrial beings here in the United States of America. The brief seemed to indicate that a meeting between the President and some of these visitors could be arranged as appropriate if desired. The tone of the brief indicated to me that there was no need for concern, since these visitors were in no way causing any harm or had any intention whatsoever of causing any disruption then or in the future.
Next, let's look at this wild quote from the famous General Douglas MacArthur. You now face a new world, a world of change. We speak in strange terms of harnessing the cosmic energy, of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy. The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. End quote. While this doesn't confirm the supposed meetings that Eisenhower had, it is pretty interesting timing given that it occurred just 1 year after that meeting in October of 1955. Eisenhower's Presidential Library Online does include a formal subject guide and a PDF, UFOs and Flying Saucers, finding aid. This documents things like press coverage, correspondence, and both denial and reporting about UFO stories during and after his administration. Finally, let's talk about the rather odd way Dwight Eisenhower left his presidency. I'm not going to sit up here and say every single thing is connected to UFOs and anybody's presidency, of course. But let's make a connection for a second. We've looked at potential documents known as Majestic 12, which sounds like a pretty secretive society in itself. Multiple presidents in the future have stated that they've tried themselves to get access to information on UFOs and have been denied. How have presidents been denied this kind of information? Who is denying them? Well, the military, of course.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Even mentions of a deep state or a shadow government have come up in interviews with presidents. Now let's talk about JFK. JFK already has numerous conspiracies swirling around him, so let's add a couple more. Why not? This is a CIA released document that was dated 10 days before the JFK assassination. This document requests all information on UFOs, also called unknowns here. People have stated that one of the reasons that JFK may have been assassinated was the intent to release classified UFO information. Although, of course, I'm not claiming that to be the only reason, if it's connected at all. One highly contested document of the Majestic 12 was supposedly written by Allen Dulles, director of the CIA. It's been badly burned, as we can see here. In it, it discusses Lancer, which is JFK's code name, and he was investigating too much into the UFO phenomenon. The situation may even become, quote, wet in October, end quote. Here comes another interesting connection and paper trail. JFK files released in 2023 under the Biden administration showed CIA agent Reuben Efron, the guy who was intercepting Lee Harvey Oswald's mail, was actually found in another CIA document. That document detailed a 1955 Soviet UFO sighting. Here's another document that's authenticity has come into question in the past. It's the Marilyn Monroe document. In summary, this document was dated one day before Monroe's death. It stated JFK had revealed too much information to her regarding the UFO phenomenon. The day after this document was dated, Monroe was pronounced dead because of an overdose. I understand that this was an overdose and often ruled a suicide. However, when you pair it with this FBI document and how to assassinate people, it all rings as interesting. This is a good time to remind people, I'm not necessarily saying that every single document we have discussed is the truth. There's probably fakes in here. There could be real ones in here. They could all be fake. But they're all definitely interesting and almost come into a cohesive narrative along the way. Finally, we have an explosive interview with Harold Malmgren with Jessie Michaels on American Alchemy on YouTube. Malmgren was an advisor to 4 US presidents and was present in the room during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He stated that during JFK's presidency, Operation Bluegill Triple Prime, a nuclear missile test, knocked a UFO out of the air. We actually have that event on film. For some reason, some versions of this video are redacted, only from a certain angle and only redacted where something falls. After his interview on American Alchemy, Malmgren's Wikipedia page was butchered by prominent Wikipedia editors. Please watch the entire interview on American Alchemy to get the whole story. Next we have Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ. His name rarely comes up in dramatic UFO legends, with Kennedy having been assassinated and much of the dramatics at the time surrounding the Warren Commission, which was the investigation into JFK's assassination. Let's take a look at a couple angles here during Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. Picking up with the story of the late Harold Malmgren, LBJ actually went with JFK to Los Alamos National Labs following the Bluegill Triple Prime test for a full briefing. If this is true, LBJ had a full insight to the nature of the UFO reality. Again, definitely watch the full interview on American Alchemy for full context. There isn't too much more to go on with LBJ's case. However, multiple famous UFO incidents did occur during this time period, as Blue Book was still operating and investigating, including a Kecksburg, Pennsylvania crash, the Lonnie Zamora incident, and the Michigan swamp gas cases, among others. And now we come to Richard Nixon. Major scandal obviously enveloped the next president. With Watergate leading to his resignation, we still have a major connection to our topic at hand. Famous comedian and actor Jackie Gleason, of Smokey and the Bandit fame, was a great friend to Richard Nixon. He was also obsessed with UFOs, even having a house designed as a UFO. On February 19th, 1973, while golfing, Nixon and Gleason talked UFOs. Nixon knew that Gleason was obsessed with UFOs, and he agrees to take Gleason to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. According to the story, he would show Gleason both wreckage of a flying saucer and the remains of 4 alien beings, only about 2 feet tall. This would reportedly shock Gleason to his core. Most people have heard this story, told in multiple interviews by his ex-wife Beverly McKittrick. This first appeared in the National Enquirer of all places. It is hard to follow up with a story like this. However, Nixon obviously didn't always fly by official rules, as shown by his other controversies. Gleason's wife, Beverly McKittrick, said that Gleason sounded deadly serious about this event, and Gleason would refuse to talk about it to anybody else until his death in 1987. And now we have our last president for part 1 of this series, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford's interesting connection with UFOs actually came when he was the House Minority Leader, representative out of Michigan. We can look through a series of press releases. In summary, this first press release talks about how the American public is becoming alarmed by UFO stories, and the Air Force, after years of investigation, has turned up nothing. He further talks about the fact that a public hearing, much like the ones we are having now about UFOs, filled with, quote, responsible witnesses from the executive branch and witnesses who say they have sighted these objects. Quote, I think the American people would feel better if there was a full-blown investigation of these incidents, which some persons allege have taken place, end quote. The next press release we have here talks about how Ford was not satisfied with Project Blue Book's J. Allen Hynek's explanation for sightings seen in Michigan.
I emphasize in conclusion that I cannot prove in a court of law that marsh gas is the full explanation of these sightings. But it does appear to me extremely likely, and furthermore, I must read, to back this point up, as I've said here, said that I am, after all, an astronomer and not a chemist. And I've pointed out that swamps are not the normal province of the astronomer. He usually has his eyes trained toward far loftier places.
This next press release is fascinating from Ford. I won't read the whole thing, but take note of a couple things here. First, he talks about the stigma. Some people ridiculed him for calling on simply an investigation into UFOs. Next, he talks about a secret closed-door armed services committee with a hearing held, and another hush-hush closed-door hearing that was held 5 years ago on behalf of the House Science and Astronautics Committee. Most importantly, the subcommittee made an oral report but never released anything to the public. That sounds familiar with a lot of the UFO history we've been looking at. Finally, Ford closes on a strong note. Quote, I have never said that I believe any of the reported UFO sightings indicate visits to Earth from another planet. Apart from pranks and natural phenomenon, some of these objects may well be products of experimentation by our own military. If this is so, why doesn't the Air Force concede it and in this way reassure the American people? There would be no need to go into detail on the nature of the experiments. Well said, President Ford, well said. After this pressure from Gerald Ford, the Air Force informed him that they were arranging a high-caliber study of the UFO phenomenon. Unfortunately, this high-caliber study became known as the Condon Report out of University of Colorado, as we can see here. The Condon Report has been widely panned since its own release, even with members of the study saying that the results of the study weren't necessarily apparent in the findings that were published. And this is where we end part 1 of US presidents and UFOs. As we can see, every president listed here has had some intersection with the subject, some more traceable than others. However, while some may have denied to answer questions on UFOs, it seems none of them were outright rejecting the notion of UFOs, which is really important and a theme that will continue through every president we have remaining on the list. I want to hear what you think. Let me know if there's anything I missed down below. We'll pick up part 2 with Jimmy Carter. Every president remaining still has interesting connections to the UFO subject. Catch you next time.